Just over a dozen world leaders attended U.S. President Donald Trump's Board of Peace ceremony as the U.S. prepares for phase 2 of the ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the U.S. sent out at least 60 invitations to join this group, but Trump wrote on Truth Social Thursday that he was now withdrawing the invitation that was sent to Canada. Many countries are still seeking clarity about what this panel is, what these agreements mean, and how they'll work. So to help us dig into that this morning is Nader Hashemi. He's the Associate Professor of Middle East Politics at Georgetown University. Welcome to your morning.
Thanks for the invite.
First of all, let's start with the latest news, which is this revoking of an invitation for Canada to join. What does that mean for Canada to be uninvited, at least according to President Trump?
Well, I think it's a huge blessing in disguise, because then Canada doesn't have to make a decision to join this, vanity project that Donald Trump is pursuing as an alternative to the United Nations. Trump has made the decision already for him. And the revocation of the invitation is really at the core of this this Board of Peace. It revolves around the personal preferences and wishes of Donald Trump, who acts as effectively an emperor. I just read through the document, and the phrase that jumps out, it repeats itself throughout the charter of this Board of Peace, is that all decisions have to be made, quote, with the approval of the chairperson, which basically, puts Donald Trump in this position as a lifetime sort of owner of this new Board of Peace. And, he appoints people who he wants. And then, as we just saw last night, he disinvites people, as he did to the Prime Minister of Canada.
19 nations did sign on to the Board of Peace this week. Those nations include countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and they signed an agreement of sorts. You've mentioned you've looked through this document. What did they sign on to, and how does it hold up in terms of international law and how it plays out on the world stage?
Well, basically, they signed up to, if you want to be objective about it, they signed up to this agreement so that they could suck up to Donald Trump, hoping that they can further their own national interests by playing to Trump's ego. That's really why these countries have done this, and the countries you just showed to your viewers. What they have in common is most of them are dictators and dictatorships and non-democratic states, and so there's a certain affinity in terms of how they think about the world, because they think about it through the lens of authoritarianism. And in terms of the question of international law, there is a reference to international law in the document, but then it's qualified by effectively saying that, any decisions made by this Board of Peace, which effectively means by Donald Trump, if they violate international law, then international law gets discarded. So, it's pretty clear, you read through the document, it's an attempt by Donald Trump to subvert the UN Charter, to subvert the rules of the international system as we've known them since World War II, and create this alternative organization where he effectively is in control. And in the name of solving global conflict and advancing peace, he can sort of preside over a new world order, a new sort of rules-based order where he effectively is the king or the emperor, if you will.
I want to show a map of the countries who did sign on to the panel this week. Canada is no longer invited, but it is worth noting that we hadn't given an agreement to even accept the invitation in the first place. We were unwilling to pay the billion-dollar membership fee, as it were. There are notable holdouts as well that include the UK, France, Italy, and Germany. So what happens if Western U.S. allies or countries like Israel or Russia don't sign on to this agreement? I guess I'm asking, what kind of authority does it actually hold globally?
Yeah, it's very good that some of those countries haven't signed on. So, for example, the justification for the UK for not signing on is that, Putin is going to be part of this project, and they just couldn't in good conscience, participate with Putin, given what he's done in Ukraine. So I think the more that those countries, distance themselves from this vanity project of Donald Trump, it'll undermine the credibility and the legitimacy of it. And then I think, if you look at the map, as I said a moment ago, it looks like a coalition of, countries that are, characterized by their authoritarianism. I mean, some of the countries that immediately jumped on, and some of the leaders who, were very enthusiastic about it, are people like Viktor Orban in Hungary, Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, Javier Milei in Argentina. So, let this be a club of dictators and authoritarian regimes, and let us sort of stick to, what has worked, not perfectly, but for better or for worse, the United Nations. Let's improve the United Nations. Let's stick to the rules of international law and not let Donald Trump, completely subvert the rules-based order that, for all of its failings, has really benefited, I think, the international system since it was first envisioned in 1945.
Nader Hashemi, I want to thank you for joining us as we close out what has been a very busy week. Lots of discussion and lots of looking at agreements around the world. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.